Well, hey there, and welcome to a brand new episode of Show Me the Crypto. This week is a real treat. We chat with one of the OGs in the Bitcoin space, Roger Ver. Ulf, what did you think of this episode?
Man, Roger's been on our list since the very beginning. We reached out to him. We had an interview secured originally in the very beginning, and then due to timing, we didn't work out. So here we are. 2 years later, we got Roger on the show, and what a treat to talk to an OG who's been in this space since basically the beginning, like very early days, and played such an important role being an advocate for Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and just peer-to-peer cash really is Roger's thing. That's what he's been pushing for since the beginning and what he's still a big advocate for today. So we got some stories about the good old days in his early days of crypto. And we also just got to learn more about his life as a person. He's a very interesting person. So I thought it was an interesting chat for sure.
Yeah, and don't get us wrong. This episode has its bits of controversy. For sure, some of the Bitcoiners might not love what Roger has to say, but that's all right. Ulf and I have always approached this show with a bit of a crypto agnostic attitude. We like to cover various people's opinions and ultimately allow our audience to decide what appeals to them. But what we loved is that Roger hasn't done an interview in quite a while. And he talked a little bit about the fact he's been working on a book, and he shared some of the alpha that he hasn't really talked to anybody else about. So this episode was a real treat. As Ulf said, I think you're really going to enjoy it.
Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto.
In a world on the brink of disruption, two men will bring you clarity by interviewing some of the most intelligent and influential names in the blockchain world. Welcome to Show Me the Crypto with your hosts, Wade Patterson and Ulf Lonergan.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Show Me the Crypto. My name is Wade Patterson.
And I'm Ulf Lonergan.
We're a couple of friends from Canada who love learning about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, and we're happy you're along for the ride. Whether you're a crypto virgin or you know your way around the block, we hope our interviews with some of the most intelligent and influential people in the blockchain space help deliver you with value. And on this episode, we're joined by Roger Ver, who you may know as Bitcoin Jesus, but he didn't give himself that nickname, and to be honest, he doesn't really like it. Roger is a Bitcoin pioneer who is the world's first investor in many Bitcoin startups, including Blockchain.com, Ripple, Zcash, BitPay, and Kraken. Roger wants peer-to-peer cash that enables more economic freedom for the world, regardless of what the name of the coin is. Roger, welcome to Show Me the Crypto.
Thank you for such a wonderful intro. I don't know who wrote that, but they did a good job. So that's the goal from day one has been peer-to-peer cash for the world, regardless of what it's called.
Good. I'm glad we got it right. We like to intro the podcast off the right note. So glad to hear that. And what I want to ask you about first is, I don't know if you remember this experience, but going back about 7 years ago, it was 2016. And this is when I first learned about blockchain technology. And it was via a website / blockchain called Steemit, the Steem blockchain. And I reached out to you through an unsolicited Twitter DM and asked you to answer 20 random questions. And for some reason, you actually took me up on this and you responded, you sent me your answers, and I posted it to the Steemit website. This post for me, up until that point, because it could earn cryptocurrency in the form of Steem that was equated in US dollars, I think the most I had made on a post before that was maybe $20, something like that. So I posted my interview with you, and it earned 4,000 US equivalent of Steem, which for me was a game changer. I'm curious, do you remember this? Because I think you maybe briefly joined Steemit shortly after that. What do you recall of that experience?
Yeah, I to be honest, I think that happened with several people, like sent me messages.
Right.
And I think the biggest one, I think one guy even got like $20,000 out of it, is what my recollection is. And I sent him an email and said, like, you're welcome. I hope that goes a long way for you. But Steemit was an interesting platform. I do remember that. I haven't used it for a number of years, and I'm not sure what the current status of it is. But those were so many wild projects all the time that were doing interesting things. So.
Well, and that's one of the things we're hoping to jump into with you is some of the nostalgia in the early days. And I'll just say, I appreciate the fact you responded to me at that time, because that made me really pay attention to like, okay, what's going on here? Because that wasn't like any other social media platform you could use that you could just earn that amount right away.
Yeah, Facebook, I never earned a single dollar from Facebook.
Exactly, 100%.
Right.
But my understanding is that what maybe is a bit of a misconception is people assume that a lot of your money originally was earned after discovering Bitcoin. But my understanding is you were a multimillionaire before that. Can you kind of walk us through your pre-Bitcoin background?
Yeah. So before Bitcoin, I started two related companies in Silicon Valley selling networking equipment. So like fiber optic transceivers and computer memory for networking equipment, and pretty successful businesses. Ran those for a long time. And one of my biggest pain points with those businesses, though, were these credit card payments from around the world with people trying to use stolen credit cards to buy my product. And so because we were selling computer memory, that's one of the top targets for people with stolen credit cards to buy, because you can resell it for 90 plus cents on the dollar. And so like the margins can be real tight for that sort of thing. And so every single day we had people from around the world trying to buy my product with stolen credit cards. And so it became like a daily task for the company and people working there. Their job was to figure out, is this order real? Is this order fake? And it was a real pain in the butt. And then when Bitcoin came along, it was like, wait a minute, this solves all of our e-commerce payment problems, because now anyone anywhere in the world can pay us and there's no risk of chargeback or payment fraud or anything like that. And I'm 44 today. I remember when eBay first got started, I was selling computer parts on eBay as well. This is before there was PayPal, and people would literally have to go to their local post office and buy a postal money order and then send that in the mail. And if you wanted to deal with an international customer, it was even more difficult to deal with any of that. And so when PayPal came along, that seemed like, and actually before PayPal, or around the same time, maybe there was another company called eGold, which I was a big fan of as well. And for those that don't know, eGold was a really neat idea. You would pay each other in gold, but the company would physically hold the gold and the gold would stay in their vaults, and you would just transfer around ownership of the gold electronically. So if I wanted to buy something from you, I would just transfer $20 worth of my gold at whatever the gold to dollar exchange rate was at that time. The gold would stay in the vault wherever, but the ownership would change on this website. And they charged, I think it was 1% per transfer or something like that. But then there was another kind of sub website that set up where they didn't charge anything. So there weren't any fees for that, but your money stayed in their sub account. And anyhow, the thing really started to get quite a bit of traction around the world, people using it. And then because some people on the website used it for some things that people in government didn't like or approve of, the government came in and they physically stole all the gold and they arrested the owner. And there were millions of users of this website at this point, and basically turned the entire thing down. And so maybe I think that probably happened in 1999, 2000, 2001, something like that. And that became a real eye opener for me. Like, oh, just because the website says you have an account balance, it doesn't mean it's safe from seizure. And then like they had all these forms you could fill out, and if you were an honest user, maybe you'd get your money back someday. But I don't know, when the seizure happened, I had like $2,000 something worth of gold in there, and the amount of paperwork and the years of this and that with the whole process, like I would be surprised if even 1% of the people that had their money there managed to get their money back. I think effectively the government just stole it all. And it seems to be that's what's going on now with FTX as well. Like FTX, there's this giant thing. It looks like the tax authorities are going to come in there and just take all the money, and all the people that actually were owed money are not going to get it. And the IRS and tax authorities are going to wind up getting almost all the money that FTX still did have left. And what are you going to do about it? Nothing is the short answer, other than hopefully be able to use some form of peer-to-peer electronic cash where you can hold the money yourself. And so it was my eGold experience that really made me realize how important it is to have something that you can hold yourself on your own device and not need a custodian to do that. And so when Bitcoin came along, this solved all of these payment problems all over the world. And so my company, MemoryDealers.com, became the first established business to start accepting it for payments. And I started paying for radio ads around the country, and I put up a billboard in Silicon Valley advertising that we were accepting it. And it's what really helped it start to get some mainstream media attention. And it was interesting, like all my other vendors and customers, when they heard we're accepting Bitcoin, they started coming to me, really? You're taking Bitcoin for payment? They were so interested. The truth was not a single customer paid me in Bitcoin, but I knew that this was going to be popular in the future. And then I went on to, and only people that have been in crypto for a long time will remember this. Like back then, the only things you could buy with Bitcoin were alpaca socks and illegal drugs on the Silk Road, right? And it's like, neither of those were very good marketing. I guess drugs are to some people, but like it's not the way you're going to get the big giant mainstream businesses on board by saying, hey, you can buy your weed with Bitcoin. And so we needed a way to entice normal people to why Bitcoin would be interesting. And so I set up a website that was called bitcoinstore.com. And through my previous business connections, I was able to leverage companies called Ingram Micro and Tech Data, which are at the time, and I think they probably still are, but the first and the third biggest consumer electronics distributors in the entire US. And they don't sell to end users. They only do business to business. But I took their entire line card, hundreds of thousands of items, and I listed all of them for sale at my cost, but you could only buy them in Bitcoin. And so the goal there was to make Bitcoin usable so that if people knew, you can buy absolutely any sort of electronic item for Bitcoin at prices generally cheaper than Amazon or Newegg.com or Tiger Direct or these other businesses in the US that sell the same sort of thing, people will think, Bitcoin is real money now because I can buy anything for it and I can buy it cheaper than I can get it from Amazon. And so I was doing that, and wow, we sold millions of dollars worth of hardware that way. And I was out there busy on Twitter and social media tagging Amazon and tagging the Newegg's and tagging Tiger Direct, saying, look at all the stuff we're selling for Bitcoin. You guys should start accepting Bitcoin too. And around the same time, I invested in BitPay.com, which is one of the biggest payment processors out there in the world for cryptocurrency payments, and was basically just trying to build all the infrastructure to allow Bitcoin to be usable for payments where people can use it in their businesses to send and receive payments all over the world. And so I think your initial question was people assumed I made my money from Bitcoin. And yeah, I made a huge amount of money from my involvement in cryptocurrency. But even before that, I had a net worth of, well over $10 million. And so that gave me the assets and the resources. I had dozens of employees around the world. It gave me the kind of the platform and the tool that I had to really try and push Bitcoin out to the world and to get people to be able to use it all over the world. And sure enough, here we are today. People are certainly paying attention to it. People are, I think, a little bit too focused on the digital investment side of things, but they're getting confused because the reason the price goes up is if people have some use case for it where they actually need to use it for something, and payment seems to be the clear use case. And it's really a little bit disappointing at this point just how many of these cryptocurrency, they're calling them wallets, but they're not actually wallets. They're just custodial accounts. And in particular, I'm talking about the Lightning Network. Almost nobody using the Lightning Network is using an actual wallet. They're just using an account like PayPal or Bank of America or something else, and their account can be frozen or blocked or funds seized at any time for any reason, or they could be doing fractional reserve stuff. And that's why it's so important to have actual peer-to-peer cash where people can hold the private keys themselves. Not only can hold the private keys, but do hold the private keys themselves. And that's why I'm a really big fan of the Bitcoin.com wallet in particular. It's a really, really easy to use wallet where the users have 100% complete control of the funds themselves. And even if the FBI came to Bitcoin.com and said, freeze this person's account or gave us this person's money, we don't have the ability to do that. We don't even know who the account holder is there. So it's a real important tool to bring more economic freedom to the world. Because we were talking about right before we started actually filming, the camera can only go 27 minutes because governments have these different taxes for video cameras versus still cameras. And it's just anytime the government gets involved in anything, it makes the world less economically efficient and a poorer place than it otherwise would have been. And if you think about it, okay, at some point in this video, maybe we'll have to hit record again on the camera here. And so we'll lose, 20 or 30 seconds of time and maybe another minute of time with me talking about it. But how many cameras around the world were sold? How many people are using these cameras? If you add up all those minutes, how many hours, how many days, how many weeks or even months worth of manpower are lost? And maybe some of that manpower would have been used for somebody to find the cure for cancer, find some other, new invention that makes the world a better place. All this time and energy and effort for just, these people to start the camera again is lost. And that who knows how much better the world could have been if that time and energy and effort wasn't lost. And the same applies with all these crazy rules and regulations on money around the world. Anytime someone's busy begging their bank to send a wire or, trying to unfreeze their PayPal account or trying to do whatever, that's time that they're not spent with their friends or family or working on something else that would make the world a better place. And so it's really, really important to just allow people to have the most control we possibly can over their own lives, because that's what pushes the entire world, further and better. And imagine if, Thomas Edison was busy at the tax office paying, his window tax or something like that, and didn't have time on that particular day to figure out the light bulb or electricity or whatever else he was up to. it might have been decades more until someone else figured that out, right? And so the entire humankind is set back from being as prosperous and as well off as we would have otherwise been if government hadn't been messing in the economy and wasting people's time with these dumb camera laws and tax laws and everything else, and prosecuting people that complain about these sorts of things. So that's my rant for the moment. But cryptocurrency is the tool to strip government's ability away from meddling in the economy and preventing the world from being as good of a place as it could otherwise become.
Roger,
and that's why I'm so excited about cryptocurrency.
You exposed our secret. We've been stitching these interviews together for all these last couple of years. Our audience never knew. Now they're going to know. They're going to be watching for the little stitched together piece.
Sorry.
So Roger, though, I'd love to go back because you brought up how Bitcoin came into your life and you saw it as this solution for like your business at the time and to get around the credit card issues that you were having to deal with. But you didn't really explain how you found Bitcoin. How did you actually stumble upon it at that time? Because it wasn't very well known back in the day. So how did it come into your world before all that, all the solution oriented actions took place?
Yeah, so I definitely was not born a libertarian. I was not born a free market guy at all, but just kind of by my grandfather as an adult was, and he had bought my mom a book called Socialism by Ludwig von Mises. And I'm guessing lots of people listening to this will have no idea who Ludwig von Mises is or the book Socialism is. And neither did I when I saw the book on the bookshelf. It was like I think it was probably the summer between 7th and 8th grade, or maybe 8th grade and before high school. And my mom told me I'm not allowed to play any more video games that day, and I had to do something else. So I went and looked on the bookshelf and was looking for a book. And as an American, back then, maybe more so than now, but back then, like most Americans knew that like Americans are supposed to be against socialism. But I didn't even know what socialism was. And I wanted to have an open mind and at least like hear the other side of the argument. So I picked up this book called Socialism, which at the time I picked it up, I thought was a pro-socialism book. But it turns out it's not a pro-socialism book. It's basically a book that points out how amazing money is in the sense that everything's priced in the terms of money. And so those price signals are what allow people to coordinate all over the world as to how to produce things. And so like, for example, like, here's a piece of paper I have here, or this is probably a better example. Here's a tape measure I have here, right? This tape measure is made with plastic on the outside. Maybe there's some rubber, there's a little metal clip, and then there's the other piece of metal in there. Like, how do we know that this should be made out of plastic and not made out of gold? And how do we know that the metal on the end here should be like, aluminum or steel or whatever it is instead of, titanium or something else? And how do we know that this little like a strap on the end, should it be woven of cotton, or should it be some nylon synthetic? Or like, how do we know what any of these things should be made out of? And the answer is that nobody knows. But the way we all come together to figure out what the best way to make a tape measure or a pencil or anything else is prices. And so the company that makes the rubber says, okay, here's the price for rubber. But maybe there's another company, maybe it could be made of wood, but there's a lumber mill that says it's this price. And like people go and see, this tape measure, I don't know, was maybe a couple dollars equivalent. Maybe there's another version of a tape measure that would cost $30. But because people buy the $5 version more than the $30 version, the factories that make them know that, okay, we should make this with, plastic instead of out of gold or something else. But the reason they know to do that is because the price of gold is more expensive than plastic. And so it's all these prices all over the world that allow millions of people who have never met to come together to make something as simple as a tape measure to collaborate with each other. Even though they never speak a single word to each other, they know how to make this. And I'm sure, there's some screws in here. There's a screw factory somewhere that makes the screws. And all these people all over the world come together to collaborate to make something as simple as a tape measure. Or there's a wonderful book that if people want to explore, it's called iPencil, that makes the claim that there's not a single person alive in the entire world that knows how to make something as simple as a pencil. And at first that sounds crazy. A pencil is so simple. Anybody knows how to make a pencil. But when you read this, it's a short book, maybe 60 pages, you realize, my God, there's not a single person alive on the planet that actually knows how to make a pencil. And it's so amazing that these millions of people are able to come together to make something as simple as a pencil. But the thing that enables that is money and the price system. And if you don't have prices and the information that are transmitted by those prices, you have no idea if the street should be paved with asphalt or paved with gold. And this book, Socialism, points out that when you have central planners, mainly the government, trying to centrally plan an economy, you don't have these price signals. So you have no idea if the street should be paved with gold or paved with asphalt. You have no idea if things should be produced locally or far away and then shipped in. And you have no idea how to do any of this. And the more economics I studied, the more I realized the free market is one of the most amazing tools, or maybe the most amazing tool humans have ever had to improve our standard of living and make the world a better place. And anytime you have any politician anywhere in the world interfering in the free market and distorting prices and distorting these price signals that allow people around the world to collaborate with each other, they're making the world worse than it otherwise would have been. And so, well, if you want to live in a better world rather than a worse world, well, we need to get the government out of everything, because they're literally retarding the entire world's rate of human progress. And look at all this stuff, amazing stuff Elon Musk is doing, right? But look how distracted he's been with the SEC and telling him what he can and can't tweet and this and that. Like, imagine if he had all those distractions, would have had all the extra money that he had to pay for lawyers to deal with all that sort of stuff. Maybe we'd already have the first civilization on Mars already, right? Maybe we'd have artificial general intelligence already. Maybe we'd have all these amazing things already. Yet people every day are being distracted with dealing with all this sorts of nonsense that's literally retarding the world's rate of economic growth, which is hindering everybody's. And I lost track of what your exact question is. Why? How did I hear about Bitcoin so early?
That's right.
Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of people in the world that have studied economics and become to being this giant free market advocate like I am today. And so the world can be a bit of a lonely place. And I was feeling really alone in the world, right? There's some, but there's not, I'm people that think similarly to myself are a very small percentage of the population, but I love it. Occasionally I get emails, or fairly often actually, I'll get emails from people that say like, I was interested in Bitcoin because I wanted to make money, but it was because I became interested in Bitcoin, I became exposed to free markets and libertarianism and voluntarism. And these ideas just make so much more sense than what I was taught in they call them public schools, but if you actually think about what public schools are, they're not public schools. They're mandatory youth propaganda camps in which everybody's indoctrinated to believe that everything the government does is wonderful. And if we didn't have government, the entire world would fall apart. And I remember as a young man, I heard Vince Saprinowitz was the author who he didn't call them public schools. He called them mandatory youth propaganda camps. And that just seems like such an extreme, crazy word to call them. But if you think about it, that really is what they are, and they're funded by theft, because if you don't pay for the public schools, you go to jail. They'll steal your home, and if you don't let them steal your home, they'll send you to jail. So they're mandatory youth propaganda camps funded by theft. And that's a real extreme, wild thing to say, but if you take a step back and really think about it, that's what they are. And some people, they're trying to argue, oh, it's not theft or it's not this and that, but the way they try and argue that is they argue that, oh, look at all the good results. People learn how to read. People learn this, that. Well, maybe that's true, but you're not arguing that it's not theft. You're just arguing that the theft leads to a good outcome. And if you want to make that argument, fine, let's have that argument. But it doesn't mean that the tax isn't theft. You're just arguing that the theft leads to a desirable outcome. And that's a fine argument to make, but be honest with yourself about that. So how did I hear about Bitcoin was the question. I was feeling alone in the world with these ideas because there's not many people that have these ideas in the world. And so I Googled libertarian podcast or free market podcast or something like that. And I was, here in Japan, and I came across a show called Free Talk Live, which is probably the number one libertarian radio show in the US or maybe the world. And they're on 100 plus radio stations across the country. And they were talking about Bitcoin in reference to the Silk Road. And I'm someone I've never bought or sold or used any drugs whatsoever in terms of illegal drugs. I've tried alcohol. I've never smoked a cigarette. I'm not a drug user, plain and simple. But I feel very strongly my body belongs to me. If I want to smoke crack, this body belongs to me. And if I do something bad while I'm on crack, punish me for the bad things I did while I was on crack, but not for the actual crack smoking itself. And so anyhow, I heard about Bitcoin in reference to the Silk Road. Went and I think I logged into it to just poke around and see what this was all about. And I thought, oh my God, what the heck kind of money can they possibly be using for this? This is incredible. You can't do this with PayPal or BankWire or postal money orders. What is this? And so I started looking into this Bitcoin thing. And it was wow, this solves the entire world's payment problems, and it makes the world more economically efficient because now these price signals can transfer all over the world without being blocked or controlled or manipulated like they are with dollars and euros and Canadian dollars and everything else out there. And so it became my life's mission at that point to spread the use of peer-to-peer electronic cash to the world. And I had read about the ideas previously. There's another economist that I'm a fan of called David Friedman, the son of the Nobel Prize winning economist Milton Friedman. And he wrote a book in, 1999 or something like that called Future Imperfect. And basically, he predicted Bitcoin back then, or at least he predicted peer-to-peer electronic cash. And his example wasn't the Silk Road, that how people were going to use it. His example was like a lawyer who doesn't have a law degree and hadn't actually graduated from the university or law school, but knew all about the law and could provide good legal advice. And even though that's illegal, this lawyer on the internet, or this effectively a lawyer, would use digital signatures to prove you're dealing with the same person over and over. And I think he called it anonymous cyber cash for the payments. And people could get legal advice from this guy on the internet without knowing his real identity. But he could prove repeatedly that you're dealing with the same person over and over. And you would have a feedback rating and leave him feedback and a reputational score and this and that. And so it was based like the Silk Road for, outlaw lawyers to give legal advice. But he wrote all about this in like the late 90s or maybe 2000. And this was so exciting. I couldn't wait for something like this to come into existence. And from that point until I heard about Bitcoin more than a decade later, I was kind of, waiting around for someone to figure out how to make that happen and invent that. And finally, when Bitcoin came along, I was like, oh, here's, one of the things I've been waiting for my entire life. And then slightly off topic, another person who really had a big impact on me was Ray Kurzweil, who wrote The Age of Spiritual Machines back in the late 90s as well. And he has some other more recent books like The Singularity is Near. But I saw you both nodding your heads because you clearly know who this guy was. But he was the guy, when I read his book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, it made me lose most of my interest in electoral politics, because superhuman intelligence is going to change the world even more. And I'm sure, we're all aware of ChatGPT at this point. And for anybody that's listening to this who hasn't tried that out yet, go and sign up for that. Pay the $20 a month for version 4.0. Like, it's really, if you haven't experienced it firsthand, it's hard to believe just how good this thing is getting. And I hate to admit, like I was a little bit late. I was only 10 minutes late to meet some friends in Tokyo the other night. But the reason I was late to meet them the other night, I was really deep and engrossed in a conversation with ChatGPT, and I couldn't quite pull myself away from the computer in time to read my real world, flesh and blood friends on time. I feel bad about that, but that just shows like how amazing this is getting. And so like the entire world is really about to change in front of us. And ChatGPT can't open a bank account, but soon these, AI bots are going to be out there. They're going to be using money, right? They're going to pay people to do things. They're not going to be doing it with Bank of America or PayPal or custodian KYC cryptocurrency accounts. They're going to be using it with cryptocurrency in which the AI has the private key themselves. And wow, who knows what's going to happen? It's going to be an exciting time, but what an exciting time to be alive. And yeah, so that's like the story of like, I guess how all the different pieces came together that I heard about Bitcoin and became so interested in, and then became, one of the key figures to drive it out to the entire world. And just some, fun backstories here too. Like people won't realize this, like CZ of Binance, right, used to live right down the street from me in Tokyo. And he was coming to the I set up the first Bitcoin meetups in Silicon Valley and in Tokyo as well. And he would show up to the Tokyo Bitcoin meetups in the early days before he was, CZ of Binance and, crypto god. And then same thing for people that have been around longer, like Mark Karpelès of Mt. Gox, like again, was just right here in Tokyo. And then, there were a lot of people, Jed McCaleb of Ripple, and then Stellar. He was the original creator of Mt. Gox and was right there in Silicon Valley running around. David Schwartz, the CTO of Ripple. I remember I was at one of the early Bitcoin meetups with him in Silicon Valley. And all of a sudden it clicked with me. I was like, wait a minute. I've met you before. I met you like a decade ago. And it turned out I had bumped into him at a AI conference in maybe the year 2001 or something like that. And I remember talking to him, and it was clear that he was a libertarian, but he was also, back in 2001, he was working at the NSA. And I remember asking him, like, how do you, and this is before the Snowden revelations and everything else. And back then I knew like the NSA weren't really our friends. They're busy spying on everybody. But I remember asking him, I said, how do you reconcile those two things, being like this free market libertarian guy and working at the NSA at the same time? And I remember he got this twinkle in his eye, and he said, because they had me working on the most subversive things imaginable. And so like, it's just kind of really interesting just how big of an overlap there were between AI stuff, libertarian stuff, and cryptocurrency stuff. And in these, Silicon Valley and Tokyo both. And so it was fun to definitely have played a role in both there. And here we are, the world has changed. There's basically not a single person at this point that hasn't at least heard of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency at this point. And it's clearly on its way to changing the world. But sadly, I don't think it's changed the world as quickly as it could have if the cards had been played a little bit differently with the scaling out of these cryptocurrencies to the world. But we can't change the past. Let's just work to make the world, a better and faster a future as quickly as we possibly can. So,
Roger, I'm glad you brought up ChatGPT, because I actually saw a recent tweet that you had put out talking about the fact that you were devastated because you got logged out of ChatGPT and lost all context from a conversation, and you felt like just a piece of you was lost, basically. And so I thought it'd be fun for this interview to ask ChatGPT to generate a question to ask you, because it has knowledge on some of your background and what you've been involved with. So it came up with the following. Considering the volatility and potential regulatory challenges faced by cryptocurrencies, what do you think is the most significant existential threat to their adoption, and how can it be mitigated?
That's another example of how just ChatGPT is so amazing. Like what a fantastic deep.
You're like
so
that.
Deep,
you're
right?
like, that's a way better question than what you guys have been asking, which is true, 100%.
A lot of my recent messages to like different people and different things, like I'll write everything myself, and then I'll pop it into ChatGPT and say like, what do you think I should change, or how could this be improved? And like, I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of the English language. It's my first language. Like I feel like I can write okay, but then I read the stuff that ChatGPT like modifies from what I wrote, and when it rewrites, it's like I just feel so humbled. Like I'm a second grader, compared to like a PhD student or something like that when I read what ChatGPT writes. So, so the biggest existential threat to cryptocurrency adoption, I think we've seen it kind of come true, right? Like in order for cryptocurrency to be useful for the world and bring economic freedom to the world, people have to be able to hold it themselves. And instead, everybody's been tricked into thinking that like 1 megabyte blocks on Bitcoin are good, which then forces everybody to use these custodial solutions. And then everyone has been tricked into thinking, oh, Lightning Network solves that. No, it doesn't, right? With 1 megabyte blocks, it would take decades to onboard the entire world. And so everybody, just for both convenience and because of the fees, like they're not using Lightning Network, they're using custodial accounts. So everybody's winding up using cryptocurrency with a custodian. And if you're using cryptocurrency with a custodian, you're right back where we started before, where they can do fractional reserve stuff, freeze your account, block your payments. Government can spy on everything you're doing. It's only ever so slightly better than the system that we had before. Whereas if you had everybody using a cryptocurrency that can scale to be money for the world, in which people have the private keys themselves and you have privacy with it, like, wow, what a powerful tool to bring more economic freedom to the world and become an existential threat to the power of governments to control peaceful people around the world. And so, like, I'm really sad and disappointed that the world has been tricked effectively into thinking that like they know the word Bitcoin, but if you look at, I just put out, my most recent tweet was a chart of Bitcoin from the beginning until 2017, and then you can see 2017 on. They're two totally different systems, totally different coins. Like Bitcoin was basically free all the time. The transactions were basically instant and basically irreversible from the start until like 2015, 16, 17. There were like some steps of changes there. And after 2017, the payments are slow, expensive, and unreliable. And it's no longer peer-to-peer cash for the world. But everybody knows the Bitcoin name. And a lot of people don't know this. Like it was razor thin. Like I was right there on the front line in a giant battle to allow Bitcoin to continue to be peer-to-peer cash for the world. People like to make fun of Bcash, and they call it, Bitcoin Cash and Btrash and all these names. Like, people don't know this. It was razor thin. The thing that's called Bitcoin Cash today almost wound up keeping the Bitcoin name. And this will infuriate these Bitcoin maximalists on the out there in the world. But I'm coming out with a book that details all of this here. I think the book should be out this year. It's basically done being written. It's with the editor now, outlining all the dirty tricks and tactics. And I think that government agencies were involved in doing this, because what's a bigger threat to government issued fiat currency than peer-to-peer cash to the world? So I genuinely think that they intentionally helped disrupt the adoption of Bitcoin around the world. But if you look at this thing that's called Bitcoin today, it's not the Bitcoin that became popular. It's not the Bitcoin that was used on the Silk Road. It's not the peer-to-peer cash for the entire world that made people excited about. And now most people, they just know the name. They don't understand the fundamental characteristics. And like, is Bitcoin Cash going to win in the end? I don't know. Maybe not. There's thousands of different competitors out there at this point. Maybe Bitcoin will get its act together and they'll scale the block size and scale the technology to allow it to be used as peer-to-peer cash for the entire world. But if they do that, it'll just point out that all the people that were advocating for the Bitcoin Cash version of Bitcoin, which was still called Bitcoin back then, they were just right to begin with, and they were ahead of the curve. And if you look at the early adopters of Bitcoin, almost all of them were fans of allowing Bitcoin to scale to become money for the entire world. Like with 1 megabyte blocks, you just plain and simple can't do that. I'm here in my apartment in Tokyo. It's like $50 a month. I have 10 gigabit internet here, and that's common in Tokyo at this point. It's common in lots of places around the world. And if you want 1 gigabit internet, right? And this is for home stuff. Most of these, and another thing, like I'm kind of tired of this argument because I argued it for half a decade or something like that too. But like home nodes aren't really the things that are making Bitcoin decentralized, right? Like it's the mining pools and the mining being able to be distributed all over the world that really helps add to that. Plus people being able to hold their own private keys. Like there's no one secret magic ingredient, but I don't think one of the very important magic secret ingredients are people being able to run full nodes on home internet connections. But anyhow, like there's a lot of competitors out there. You have the privacy coins, the Moneros, the Zcashes, the Zanos, and then you have, Bitcoin Cash with Cash Fusion. I don't know what does Bitcoin even have a privacy tool at this point? Like, I don't know. There's some tumblers. They sent those guys to jail for running those things out there. Like, I don't know. It's been frustrating to see like the delay that's happened. What were you going to say?
I was just wanted to ask because you've started discussing and comparing Bitcoin Cash, but Wade and I, we actually haven't had the opportunity to dig into Bitcoin Cash with our audience on an episode yet. And I'd love to know just, what is Bitcoin Cash from its inception during that fork in 2017, and where are we? And where's Bitcoin Cash today compared to, maybe it was from the point of that fork?
Yeah, so Bitcoin Cash today is basically Bitcoin from 2009 until 2015 or something like that. It's fast, cheap, reliable, irreversible transactions. But because the way the civil war within Bitcoin played out, it didn't wind up keeping the Bitcoin name. So people today view Bitcoin Cash as some other coin. And like the vast majority of the world views it that way. And the vast majority of the world thinks, oh, I'm just going to buy Bitcoin. They see it's, $30,000. Bitcoin Cash is, $130. They think, oh, Bitcoin must be the better thing. And to be honest, like so far, Bitcoin has been a better investment than Bitcoin Cash. But that doesn't mean that Bitcoin Cash isn't a better payment network. It isn't a better version of peer-to-peer cash for the entire world, but there's a lot of competition out there for it too. And like, I'm a fan of like all of the privacy coins out there. Bitcoin Cash can be used as a privacy coin because of this thing called Cash Fusion. But you also, like I said, have, the Moneros and Zanos and Zcash and Zcoin, and there's a zillion of them out there now. But the problem with the ones that are private all the time by default and don't have this shared origin with Bitcoin is that like, I'm here in Japan. All the privacy coins by default, the Moneros and these and that, they're illegal in Japan. The exchanges in Japan are not allowed to list them already. And like, yeah, they're decentralized, and maybe you can find someone on the street corner that'll sell you some for cash or something like that, or buy some other crypto and swap into it. But like, that's a big hurdle that Bitcoin Cash doesn't have because it shares the exact same ledger with Bitcoin. The main difference is that instead of limiting it to 3 to 7 transactions per second, Bitcoin Cash can do hundreds or thousands of transactions per second. It can scale to be money for the entire world, just like was outlined by Satoshi Nakamoto himself and all the people that got involved in Bitcoin early on. It would have been stunning to us in the early days. And if you had told me in 2013 or 2011 or any time back then that like Bitcoin wasn't going to be allowed to scale to be money for the world because people would be tricked into thinking that limiting the block size would be like a smart thing to do to drive adoption, I'd say like, you must be smoking crack you bought from the Silk Road. Like that's such a stupid idea. Yet people were tricked into believing that. And so many people are tricked into believing that today, that like limiting the block size on Bitcoin somehow was a good thing for Bitcoin. Like that was the biggest disaster for Bitcoin. It led to a civil war. It led to multiple chain splits. It led to reverse adoption, where you used to have companies like Microsoft and Steam and all these companies were Expedia. They were accepting Bitcoin. They stopped when the blocks became full. And I was ahead of the curve, telling everybody about Bitcoin. I was ahead of the curve, sounding the alarm bells for not letting the blocks become full on Bitcoin as well. But thanks to censorship and personal attacks and all sorts of crazy stuff, like the other side managed to win that argument. But Oh, there's some actor that put out on Twitter recently. I forget. I can see his face. Some comedian guy. Turns out he's one of the very few like famous actors, also a free market libertarian guy. But he pointed out, he goes, "Look at that! All throughout history, the good guys won every single time. What are the odds of that happening?" And because the winners always write the history. And if you look back on history, everybody feels like the good guys won like every single time. But like the same is true with the Civil War within Bitcoin. Like the winners wrote the history. The good guys didn't win that battle. It was the guys using censorship and personal attacks and DDoS attacks and just all sorts of crazy, nasty, dirty tactics. And they wound up effectively stealing the Bitcoin name and stealing the entire network effect and adoption movement that Bitcoin had for a project that's not Bitcoin today. The thing that's called Bitcoin today is not the Bitcoin that made people excited in the early days. And that'll infuriate a lot of people that I would even say such a thing. But like, there's hardly anybody better in the entire world to make such a statement, since I was there right there from the very beginning and I watched the entire thing happen. And again, I have a book coming out that's outlining the entire thing. So I'll start to, you're the first. I haven't been doing interviews at all recently, but this is the first time I've even mentioned that. I believe that's coming out. So look forward to that sometime around the end of the year, and it'll document everything. And people read all the dirty stuff that happened and went on. Again, their jaw will drop. And again, like, to put on my conspiracy theory hat, like, I think absolutely there were like covert government agents that were involved, intentionally trying to disrupt the adoption of Bitcoin around the world. Because what bigger threat could there be to the dollar and other government currencies around the world than peer-to-peer electronic cash that anybody can use without permission? So of course they want to delay that from being adopted worldwide. And we've seen anybody that does anything that's disruptive to government's control, governments come after them. Look what they did to Snowden. Look what they did to Julian Assange. And even in my own life, like they've been bothering me nonstop, even though I'm not even I'm not even an American anymore. Like one example of this, like I'll talk about because it's done and over, and there's unfortunately numerous examples. There's another YouTuber I like named Adam Kokesh. They made a bunch of great YouTube videos that I really like, advocating for voluntarism and free market type stuff. I gave him some money over the course of a number of months or whatever. For a couple of years, I gave money just to help fund his spreading these messages that I like. And at some point in, 2020, he ran for not president of the United States. And so he said if he was elected as not president of the United States, he would have an orderly dissolution of the entire United States federal government. He'd lay off all the employees and basically, in an orderly fashion, shut down the entire United States federal government and turn everything back over to the 50 states, right? So he ran for not president of the United States. He got John McAfee was his running mate for the Libertarian Party nomination. I think they got third or fourth or fifth place in the nomination for the Libertarian thing. So a different Libertarian candidate wound up winning the nomination. And then that candidate got less than 1% of the vote in the United States. Yet the United States government looked into, because I gave this guy money over the course of several years, they looked into prosecuting me for being a foreigner interfering in American elections or something like that. And I didn't even give him any money for his campaign. I just gave money to make YouTube videos. And I had to spend tens of thousands of dollars on lawyers to convince the U.S. government not to prosecute me for being a foreigner interfering in American elections. And it's just crazy. And the really crazy part, when they finally decided they weren't going to prosecute me for interfering in American elections, it was a split decision. It was deadlocked, whether to prosecute me or not. Wow. And luckily for me, when it's a split decision, when it's 50-50, they default to not actually prosecuting. And my other, libertarian buddy, I won't say his name because I don't want him to get prosecuted too, but he told me, he said, that's the best possible outcome, Roger. And I said, what do you mean that's the best possible outcome? I just barely escaped being prosecuted criminally for interfering in American elections, right? And he goes, no. A split decision is the best possible outcome because it means it pissed off the maximum number of them that you possibly could, and there's nothing they can do about it. Okay.
Nice. Well, I wanted to ask too about, not your keys, not your coins, and that whole sort of outlook on cryptocurrency and the importance of not actually having sort of pseudo crypto where it's just a centralized agency that's actually holding your coins. And I bring it up because very recently, I'm wondering if you're aware or have heard of Ledger's recent move to I'll basically allow users who lose their keys to still recover access to their funds. But the way they do that is by securing their keys themselves through centralized parties. And so they've got a lot of flack about this because Ledger is one of the most well-established names in the hardware wallet space, maybe probably the biggest. And they've been basically preaching the right things for a long time, and here now they introduce this. And while you could say maybe their heart's in the right place to try and help users who lose their funds, that's a sad story, but they're kind of doing it the wrong way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I heard a little bit about that, to be honest. Like the last year or so, I've been dealing with some things in my personal life. So like that's part of why I haven't been so active in the crypto space. Not that I wouldn't like to, but like I said, I've been real distracted with some things in my personal life. But disappointing to see that. And again, like it doesn't mean that everybody has to have their own keys. Like custodians are fine, but like it has to be really easy and fast and cheap and reliable to have your own keys. And like you're talking about pseudo wallets, whatever. Like this whole Lightning Network stuff is, if you look at it, like 90+% of the users out there, they're just using a custodian account. And like, I think it does the world a real big disservice when you're just having an account, but they're still calling it a wallet. A wallet is not an account. A wallet is something where you have the money yourself. If someone's holding the money for you, it's an account. And so I think a lot of these Lightning wallets need to rename themselves accounts. And same with a lot of these cryptocurrency wallets. They're not wallets, they're accounts. And so people need to call them for what they are, so that people know if you're using an account, your account funds can be frozen or seized at any time. And so in regards to like Ledger, I think it lets you, their tone has changed. Like, buyer beware, keep an eye on things. And I don't know, that's part of the beauty of the free market, right? We have Ledger, we have Trezor, we have, iOS wallets, Android wallets, desktop wallets. You have, I don't know, someone can probably figure out how to make a tape measure that has the private keys somehow like on the tape. So people will see it and they just think that it's a tape measure, but it's storing your private keys. Like there's a million different choices out there. And so the fact that they have choice in the market is a great thing. And it'll allow people to have the version that's the best for them. And so that's a good thing. And maybe previously previously Ledger was great for lots of people. Maybe next week it won't be, and people will use something else, whether it's the blockchain.com wallet, their Coinbase account, like their, take your pick. The more choices people have out there, the better.
Roger, one thing I'm curious about. So on our show, we kind of, both Alf and myself, I think we'd probably describe ourselves as crypto agnostic, in the sense of, we believe in probably a, what's the word? Like multi-chain.
Whatever works.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. That type of future. Admittedly, like the blockchain we cover the most on this show, I think, is Ethereum. Probably like the most projects. During the NFT boom, we had a lot of different people in that space on our show, which surprised us when we launched this show. It was before the NFT boom, so the show's kind of taken some different paths. But I'm just curious because I haven't heard a lot about what your opinion on the Ethereum ecosystem is. What are your feelings toward Ethereum?
Yeah, so if I had, even though Ethereum doesn't have the biggest market cap, like compared to Bitcoin, I think Ethereum's the front runner in terms of like driving worldwide adoption and things that happen. Even Ethereum's having its own scaling issues, and there's a bunch of Ethereum clones, but like the EVM chains seem to be where the action's at. And so like if I had to pick like the front runner, it's probably that ecosystem. And more power to Vitalik and all that. But it's also worth pointing out, all of that would have been built on top of Bitcoin if not for this, scaling civil war that happened within Bitcoin. And these Bitcoin core developers, they hate Vitalik, and they basically drove him from the project to go and create Ethereum. And more power to him for that. And I remember when Vitalik was just this young kid writing articles for Bitcoin Magazine back in the day, and I first met him I think in 2012 at the PorcFest, which was an event in New Hampshire. And he's clearly he's a smart kid, but like, wow, look at where he's gone since then. So not only congratulations, but thank you to Vitalik, right? He's one of these people that have pushed all of humankind forward into the future, made the world a better place significantly. So special thanks to him for having done that. And I guess a special, whatever the opposite of a thanks is, to the people that actively hindered the adoption of Bitcoin around the world and use censorship and personal attacks and DDoS attacks and all these sorts of things to literally delay the adoption of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency around the world. So thank you, Vitalik, and the opposite of whatever a thank you is to these people that work to delay the adoption of crypto around the world.
Regardless of the blockchain we're talking about, I think when you look at the landscape today in the world of crypto, a lot of projects that are being built are starting with this model of centralized, being centralized in the beginning because they're essentially being built by a company, right? A group of individuals who, in order to get things done and get things off the ground, they start as a team and everything is centralized. And it's a mission to become decentralized, and they're working towards that, but they don't start that way. I'm curious with someone who, values decentralization greatly, and not that a lot of these other projects don't, but what do you think of that approach? Does it make sense? Is it the faster, better way to get there? Or do you think that there's alternatives?
It probably is the faster, better way to get there. Because let's stop and think, how many projects can we think of that didn't start out as some centralized something or other and then wound up becoming decentralized versus were just decentralized from day one? And I don't know, I guess you could kind of argue, because Satoshi hid who he was, that Bitcoin was decentralized from day one, but it was still probably the one guy doing it, not Craig Wright, but somebody else. And speaking of I don't know what that guy's deal is. A lot of people, I don't know how much it's been in the crypto media at this point, but I should point out, that guy's still busy suing everybody. He's suing me for the third or fourth or fifth time. He's suing all these other, Bitcoin developers. He's suing Bitcoin Cash developers. I think he sued Vitalik multiple times. That guy is just such a troublemaker, and I wish he just would, go out there and do something productive in the world, and instead of just, making a bunch of lawyers rich. Because I haven't had to pay Craig Wright a single dime, but I've had to pay lawyers, hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point. But Craig Wright has to keep, paying me back for most of those lawyers. So anyhow, to answer your question, I think maybe there is a better way to do things, but the vast majority of the world hasn't figured out that better way, and until they figure it out, the way is the way that everybody's doing it. And the way seems to be, all these things start out centralized to begin with, whether it's, Coinbase was centralized, blockchain.com, Ripple, all these coins have centralized teams around them. That seems to be the way. And if you see something otherwise, please open my eyes to it. But so far, it seems like centralized platforms that maybe go on to become decentralized. But it takes time and effort, but almost everything.
Well, and I don't have another method that I can think of, but I am curious, sort of leading into this, what I've seen is that sometimes people will call something decentralized that actually isn't yet, because whether it's being marketed that way, right off the bat, or it's sometimes the people misunderstand and they assume that a project or a blockchain is decentralized right from the get-go. And it's no, this is a mission to get there, and that's going to take a lot of time. Do you think that in itself causes some level of confusion, kind of going back to what you're talking about with the Lightning Network, and that some things, maybe some of these projects will never be decentralized, some aim to be, but regardless, they get misinterpreted?
Yeah, you're spot on. If you have to call a spade, you have to call a wallet, and you have to call a decentralized product a decentralized product, and a centralized one. And I guess one real good example of this. So there's this Strike wallet, the Lightning wallet there, and Jack Mallers is one of the better advertisers or promoters in the BTC ecosystem. But he's doing the world a huge disservice. Strike Wallet is not a wallet; it's a custodial account, and people are having their accounts frozen and this and that. And it's just really disappointing. And I guess that's why language is so important, right? You have to call things what they are. Public schools aren't public schools; they're mandatory youth propaganda camps funded by theft. And a decentralized platform is totally different than a centralized one. And so, to call Bitcoin decentralized today, the vast majority of people that are using Bitcoin aren't taking advantage of its decentralization characteristics in any way whatsoever. They're just holding their funds in an account, and it's disappointing to see that. But language is so important for anybody that's read, George Orwell. The power of this Orwellian doublespeak. We're seeing it seep into the crypto space as well. You call things what they really are, and don't butter them up with false euphemisms about what they're not.
So Roger, you had mentioned the Craig Wright lawsuits, and I don't know how much you can comment on some of the other things that have happened somewhat recently, but there was news earlier in the year that Genesis was suing you for $20 million in unsettled crypto option trades. There was also headlines about you defaulting on a debt the year before. Are you able to give us any updates or any context on those situations?
Yeah, I can give you a lot of update on Genesis. So I just filed my lawsuit against them. That's public. If you go and Google it, you can read all the details that are right there laid out. I think I'm able to talk about that publicly. So basically, I had a bunch of options with Genesis. Turns out they were lying to me about their solvency and lying to everybody else about their solvency. And so like if one party's insolvent and you're trading options with the other one, it's a game of heads they win, tails I lose. And so when I found out that they were lying to me, I refused to pay them the money that they say I owed them. And now there's a lawsuit over it, but I'm very confident in that one. There's been some other stuff going around that I can't comment on, or I won't comment on. But I'll say this. I've paid every single person in my entire life, every penny I've ever owed them, and I don't owe anybody anything that I haven't paid. So I'll leave it. My track record speaks for itself. Like I have a long string of, decades of successful business there. So I don't, anybody that I've ever owed any money to, I've paid every single penny in my entire life, and I have no outstanding debts to anybody is the long story short. But I invite people, like when Genesis filed their initial lawsuit, like it got some media attention. Mine just got filed, I think, a week ago today, but I didn't say anything on any media about it at all because I want to focus on some things in my personal life that have really been important to me. So I don't want the extra distractions, but anybody that's interested can go out there and Google it, and everything's laid out there in the lawsuit against Genesis. So.
Cool. We had Ben Mesrick on the podcast last year. Ben Mesrick wrote a book, Bitcoin Billionaires. And I'm curious, you were portrayed in that book, and I'm wondering what your thoughts were on how you were portrayed.
I have to admit, I think I met him when he interviewed me for the book at some point, but I have to admit, I haven't actually read that one. I did read Digital Gold by Nathaniel Popper. And I have to admit, he did a really accurate job on everything in that one. At some point, when I have some more free time, I'd love to go back and I guess reminisce of those days, and I'll read Bitcoin Billionaires at some point. But I can't comment directly because, sorry, I didn't read that one.
Fair enough.
No worries. But speaking of books, and you've alluded to it a couple times, you're coming out with your book. Can you give us some little bit more information and context? What inspired you to do that? Was it a cathartic process where you just kind of wanted to relive some of these stories, or what was the inspiration behind the book?
There's another book called and Safety and Amos has the Bitcoin Standard book. I haven't read it cover to cover, but the excerpts I've read, this guy completely missed the entire point. He wants to have central banking using Bitcoin as the reserve and this and that. If you want to do that and advocate something, that's fine, but that's not Bitcoin. That's not what Bitcoin was all about to begin with. And that's just a great example of how the Bitcoin project was hijacked and morphed into something else. There's another Block Size War book that came out. I haven't read cover to cover, but the excerpts that I've read, is clearly written from the winner's side. And I think it's important for the other side to have their story told. And nobody else seemed to be doing it. So I teamed up with another guy. I don't know if he wants me to give his name or not, but I think it'll be on the book there at some point. But anyhow, it needed to be documented so people can realize and maybe in the future, people realize hey, Bitcoin was hijacked and subverted and delayed for becoming peer-to-peer cash for the world. And I thought it was important that it would be documented out there. And so that's coming out. And it's important that not only the winners write all the history, and now year 2023, the losers can still have a bit of a voice. And the people that wanted Bitcoin to be cash for the world, we lost the civil war in Bitcoin, but I think we took the more honest route. We didn't do the dirty, underhanded, dirty tricks, but because we weren't really willing to play dirty, we wound up losing. And so that's sad. And I still kind of wonder, I think that's the right thing to do, not to do dirty lies and tricks and underhanded, immoral things. But if you wind up losing because of that, and then the entire world didn't wind up becoming as good of a place because you didn't do that, I don't know, there's a bit of a moral dilemma there that's still been kind of frustrating and weighing upon me because, Bitcoin probably could have already been peer-to-peer cash for the world. And people say, oh, it hit $60,000. Maybe it would have already hit $600,000 at this point if it had actually been usable the entire way through and didn't have this huge disruption to people being actually able to use it for money. And then people call the people that were complaining about it liars. I was running these businesses accepting Bitcoins for payments. Bitcoin became unusable. If you read the press release from Steam as to why they stopped accepting Bitcoin, because the payments become unusable, because the fees became too high and the transactions became too slow. That's why people stopped using it. It wasn't any reason other than that. And all you had to do was allow the block size to increase with the people that were using it and the technology improvements around the world. It would have continued to be peer-to-peer cash for the world with no problem, and would have been, instead of having, 35% market share today in terms of market cap, maybe it would still have 98% market share. Before the blocks became full, Bitcoin had way over 90% market share, and people weren't really paying any attention to any of these other coins. And it wasn't until the blocks became full, boom, people started looking at Ethereum and Dash and Ripple and this and that. And like there's now thousands and thousands of competitors out there, whereas they didn't have any traction at all. It was Bitcoin allowing the user experience to become so bad that opened the door for all these competitors to Bitcoin. And from one perspective, maybe that's good. Competition's a good thing. But like when you have that big of a head start and you have this real chance to become money for the world and displace the dollar and the euro and the yen for what people are using in commerce, like don't let that chance go. Yet that's exactly what happened is that chance slipped by. And now it'll be much, much, much harder for any cryptocurrency to supplant the dollar and the euro and the yen. And you have all these central banks are busy trying to roll out their own central bank issued digital currencies. And it's like we lost that first mover advantage in that open window we had to become peer-to-peer cash for the world in a short amount of time.
Is there a rough idea of what the release date of the book's going to be?
It should be this year. Yeah,
this year?
It's with the editor now. So.
Perfect. And another thing I want to ask about before we get to the end, by the way, we ask every guest the same 3 questions. So we'll get to that segment in a second. But first, you've talked about creating a non-country free from government control. And my understanding is it's an idea that's kind of been brewing since 2017. Where is that at?
So there's a lot of attempts actually where people have been trying to do that. So there's some guys down in Honduras that are trying to do it with some island. There's the freesociety.org project there, or maybe it's .com, I should know, but check both. So that's coming along. Like I said, unfortunately, my own work output the last year has been distracted by these personal issues, but I'm still very, very interested in these ideas and want to do whatever I can to push those ahead in the future. And I think we'll see more and more of that. There's another one, Joson is another cyber state, I guess you want to call it. So real interesting background there. So like the former like king of Korea before Japan made it a colony and like kicked that guy out. And then World War II happened and this and that, and there's all this stuff. But like, there's a direct hereditary line to this other guy that's deep into crypto and has been in crypto. Got involved probably around the same month I did, and I've known him for a long time. And he's the hereditary heir to that. And there's signed treaties with the United States and France and other countries from like the early 1918 or something was the last treaty. But then they've signed some more recent treaties, and they're reestablishing this nation state in cyberspace, basically, where it's going to be an online version. And so it's interesting to see that get traction. So like the more different attempts at this to give people more control over their own lives, like the better. And hopefully eventually one of them will succeed in a big way and help liberate millions of people. And another example of that, though, too, like I'm a citizen of the nation state of St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean. It almost to me feels like a bit of like the Underground Railroad. Like Canadians, like you saw during COVID, like, boy, did you guys get locked down and controlled. Americans, even if they leave America and living outside, they're still controlled by the American tax authorities anywhere. St. Kitts is a pretty darn wonderful place. Like they'll leave you alone. And if you've earned enough money from crypto or somewhere else for a little over $100,000 US, you can become a citizen there in about 90 days. If you're interested in that, you can text message me, email me, roger@rogerver.com. I'll introduce you to the right agents there. But it's probably the happiest day of my entire life was the day I stopped being an American. And occasionally people say like, oh, don't you feel like a traitor for doing that? Or don't you feel bad? And it's like, do you not know America's history at all? The way America was founded was by a bunch of British people saying, hey, I'm going to stop being British. I'm not going to be part of your country anymore. So renouncing your American citizenship is one of the most American things you can possibly do. It's literally the way the entire country was founded. So you shouldn't feel bad about that one bit in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, to answer your question, like I'm still very interested in that, still actively working on that. And eager to see at least one of these projects, if not maybe several of them, get some traction around the world.
Roger, this has been such an interesting conversation. As I mentioned, we like to end every episode of Show Me the Crypto with the same 3 questions we ask every guest. It's a segment we call You Had Me at Crypto. Ulf is going to ask you those questions.
All right, Roger, you ready?
Ready.
All right. The first question is, who is your favorite person to follow in the crypto space?
Sal the Agorist. I don't know if you're aware of him, but he's definitely big time into crypto, but the philosophy that he espouses there is my favorite. Like he just has these powerful tweet after powerful tweet after powerful tweet, and he's my favorite Twitter account to follow. So Sal the Agorist. I think Sally Mayweather is the actual Twitter ID, but if you Google Sal the Agorist, it'll come up. And Yeah, sorry, I didn't know that was going to be the question, so I didn't.
Yeah.
I think at Sally Mayweather is the actual ID, but
Cool.
Sal the Agrest, and he has a podcast as well. Feel free to check that out.
Nice.
Also.
Cool. All right. Second question. What will the price of Bitcoin be 10 years from now?
10 years from now, people always like to ask, what's it going to be next week or next month? But 10 years from now,
we're going long haul.
I think it'll be way, way, way higher than it is, but not necessarily because it's way more useful than it is. Probably just because they're going to print more dollars and print more yen and print more euros. And so like there's a sliding scale on both sides. The one's like the amount of utility that Bitcoin has and people that want to use it because of that. And then two, the amount of dollars in circulation. So just like, the house I grew up in as a little kid back then, I think my parents bought it for like $45,000 or something around the time I was born. Today, that house is over $1 million. Maybe it's over $2 million by now. It's for sure over $1 million. And it's not because it's a better house and way more useful or that more people are demanding. It's just they printed more dollars in the meantime. So like it's still the same house. In fact, it's an older house than it used to be. But the fact that the price is 20, 50 times more than it was before just shows that maybe Bitcoin will go up 50 times from what it is in the next decade. But maybe it's because they printed a whole bunch more dollars. So.
All right. Third and final question. What is the most underrated project in all of crypto?
Other than Bitcoin Cash.
I don't think Bitcoin Cash is the most underrated project in all of crypto. I think the most underrated one is probably one that I don't know about yet, right? And that's the problem. It's like, I made the billions of dollars here because I found Bitcoin when it was less than $1, right? Because it was underrated. Nobody knew or appreciated what it was, or I invested in these different businesses while they were still underrated. People didn't know what they were. And so I can't say what the most underrated one is because I don't know about it yet. I have to have the time to go out there and research and find it. And sorry, let me mute my notifications again.
No worries.
I only set it for an hour and we've gone over an hour. But the most underrated one that I do know about, I think, is probably Zano. I'm a big Zano fan. Zano. They have it's the guy that wrote all the code to build it is the same guy that wrote all the code to build Monero originally. And so Zano's kind of like Monero in that sense, but you can have staking on it. And you can, I think the rewards are like 6% APR or something on your stake Zano. But the part that if it gets traction, I think will really be a big game changer. So it's totally private, like Monero. You send a transaction, you don't know who sent what to who or any of that. But you can stake it, which previously, before they figured out how to do that, people thought it would be impossible to stake a privacy coin because how do you know how much you've staked if it's a privacy coin? But somehow they figured out how to do that. But it also has tokens, but the tokens are totally private as well. So imagine like anybody can make like a Monero style privacy token on top of this blockchain. And then there's escrows built in. And it's like, nobody's really started using this in commerce yet. But when people figure out that you can have like totally private, anonymous, like tokenized escrow stuff, like there's just so much amazing, cool commercial stuff that can be done on this. And so like, I think that's probably the most underrated project that I'm aware of, but there's probably even more crazy, amazing, wonderful things out there that I'm not aware of yet. And so maybe once ChatGPT or these other general AI bots have full access to the internet, that's a great question to ask that because they can research a lot faster than I as one single human being can. So.
Awesome. Well, as I said, Roger, this has been a real treat. We mentioned before we hit the record button that when we started this podcast, you were one of the names on our list of wish list guests. So this was a pleasure being able to interview you. Thank you for joining Alf and I on this episode of Show Me the Crypto.
It was my pleasure. And thank you guys for such a wonderful time as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Show Me the Crypto. Please make sure to subscribe as well as rate and review this podcast.